Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, I would like for us to explore the 4 default conflict types that I've come across in my own personal experience that I ended up having to do a lot of research about because these were conflict types that I recognized in my work, and as I started to, extend that knowledge, I really noticed that these default conflict types were everywhere around me. They were in my family, they were in the, public when I went out, and I thought, you know what, if we knew how to move from these conflict types into something healthier, I think we'd be able to sort through conflict a lot better. And so I committed to learning more and teaching people about this. Today we will explore our default conflict type. And I don't want you to get offended when you learn what your conflict type is or frustrated, because I know that we do have a society where people are really focused on perfection, and so it can be really frustrating and humbling to learn about these conflict types and discovering, that you're following some patterns and subconscious patterns that you are not even aware of. And so we're going to explore the conflict types, we're going to learn what they are, and we're going to learn about the health risks about them. And later on, we'll do more work. How do we respond to these conflict types? How do we move beyond them into something healthier? How do we have a difficult conversation? That's going to be part of this conflict series, but I really feel that the main place that we need to start is understanding our role in the conflict and understanding what are we doing subconsciously and how is that impacting and interfering with healthy relationships, because we're all doing it. So what we're going to do first is we are going to do a test. It's a short test that I like people to do, and it's only, I think, 7 or 9 questions, and I'll read them out loud. If you're listening, you can just mark down your answers and we'll tally them up, and then we'll get to work on discovering more about your conflict type. Okay? Before we start, I really want you to focus on the answer that you were most likely to agree with. I know some of the answers might seem a little bit outlandish and you might be like, oh, I would never do that or anything like that. But I want you to choose something that you feel is closest to how you would respond, because we really need to know what your conflict type is, and everybody has a default conflict type. So don't worry about the perfect answer. I don't want you to say this is exactly 100% what I would do in that situation, because there's some variance, of course, for people and personality types, but I want you to try and choose the answer that is closest to what you would do, okay? And maybe you will. Maybe you'll listen to the answers and you'll say 100% that's what I would do. Good. Easy peasy, you're done. But for some people, I know you might hem and haw, and that's fine. You can pause and go, you know what, I think I'm maybe more A than D, and then that's what you choose. Just the one that's closest to how you think you would respond, okay? That's the one caveat, because I know every time people do this, I wouldn't do that. Well, I know these are just fake scenarios, and I just want you to choose something that's closest so we can figure out what you mostly behave like in conflict situations, okay? I'm just going to get my questions ready here. Question number 1. When you find yourself in a disagreement, how do you typically react? A, I try to avoid the situation and let it go unresolved. B, I don't express my frustration outright, but may leave passive hints or make sarcastic comments. C, I keep quiet and let the resentment build up until I can't handle it anymore. D, I confront the issue head on and I'm not afraid to raise my voice if necessary. Question number 2. If your boss asked you to stay after work because they wanted to talk to you about something, would you A, tell them you were sick in the afternoon and go home early? B, call HR and tell them all the dirt you have on your boss. C, write down all the things they've done that pissed you off so you're ready for the meeting. Two can play this game. D, tell them no, you want to talk right now, you don't want to wait. Whatever they want to say, they can say it to you right now to your face. Question number 3. If someone insults you or challenges your beliefs, how do you respond? A, I usually keep my thoughts to myself and move on. B, I might make sarcastic comments or give them the cold shoulder without addressing the issue directly. C, I may stay calm initially, but the anger builds and I eventually lose my temper in a big way. D, I aggressively challenge them, trying to overpower their point of view with my own. Question number 4. You learned that your best friend said something super rude about you to a mutual friend. Do you A, ignore it because they're probably right about what they said? I don't know. B, ghost your best friend. Maybe a little silent treatment will teach them that they need to respect you. C, file away all this information. You never know when you'll need it. Your best friend is clearly your frenemy. D, go up to your best friend and give them a piece of your mind. Question number 5. In a team setting, how do you deal with a conflict over decision making? A, I avoid the discussion and let others take charge to keep the peace. B, I don't voice my opinion directly, but will try to undermine others through subtle behavior or comments. C, I hold my thoughts in, waiting until I feel completely overwhelmed, at which point I'll explode in frustration. D, I assert myself forcefully, demanding that others listen to my side, and I push for my ideas to dominate. Question number 6. You're having a lovely Sunday drive until someone rudely cuts you off. You, A, apologize to them. They probably had an emergency and you were in the way. B, call the police and report a drunk driver and give them their license plate number. C, honk and give them the finger. What a jerk. D, speed up and cut them off. Let's see how they like it. Question number 7. How do you behave in the heat of an argument? A, I tend to shut down, avoid further interaction, or withdraw from the situation. B, I use passive-aggressive tactics like ignoring them, making indirect comments, or withholding communication. C, I stay calm at first, but when I snap, it can feel like an overwhelming outburst. D, I become verbally aggressive, interrupting, raising my voice, and pushing my perspective hard. Question number 8. Your ex's new partner writes a long post about how toxic you are on social media, and that's why they left you. Do you A, delete social media? Nobody needs that kind of negativity. B, write a retaliatory post about how your ex cried to you that their new partner gave them an STI. Karma's a B. C, comment on their post about all the crappy things your ex told you about them and then proceed to have a fight in the comment section all night long. D, drive to their house and bang on the door until they answer. They're going to see just how toxic you really are. And question number 9, how do you usually resolve conflicts? A, I let it go, hoping things will work out on their own. B, I never fully address it, but I make subtle comments or behave in a way that shows my dissatisfaction. C, I don't confront it immediately, but carry it with me until I eventually explode over something minor. D, I address the issue aggressively and forcefully, ensuring the other person knows I'm in charge. All right, so that is all of the questions. There were 9 questions. I want you to tally your points. So for the scoring, for each question, assign the following points based on the selected answer. If you chose an A, give yourself 1 point. If you chose a B, 2 points, C, 3 points, and D is 4 points. That'll be for all the 9 questions. Add them up, and we're going to find out what style you are. If you had 8 to 15 points, or if you abstained from answering, I'm going to put you in 0 to 15 points. You are conflict avoidant. If you had 16 to 22 points, passive aggressive. If you are 23 to 28 points, explosive. And if you are 29 to 36 points, confrontational aggressive. Okay, so those are all of the conflict types. Thank you for doing that test. And now we're going to learn all about your conflict types. And after I read them, I'll share with you which one I am, because of course I had a natural default and conflict type, and I've been actively working towards a healthier conflict type. But, the same as everybody else, I have one too. So whatever you are, don't judge yourself too harshly. I really feel that a lot of these conflict types, while we're not specifically taught about conflict and how to handle conflict, we default into them often as a result of the people who are around us and what we see. And what we see doesn't necessarily mean that becomes our conflict type, but it becomes our natural response to conflict. And so, I've seen everything across the board where, you have parents that are maybe conflict avoidant, and then you become confrontational as a result because nobody's dealing with the conflict. Or vice versa, where, maybe your parents were very explosive or confrontational aggressive, and now that means you have reverted to conflict avoidance or passive aggression because that is your default, that you don't want to, be creating more conflict. You don't want to see more of the drama. So, like I said, don't judge yourself too harshly. We're going to learn more about this, and we're going to figure out what do we do with this information? Okay, so let's learn about conflict avoidant behaviors. A conflict avoidant person avoids conflict at all costs. Even when something needs to be addressed, they are avoiding it. Some common behaviors for a conflict avoidant person are changing the subject when tension arises, agreeing outwardly but disagreeing internally, avoiding feedback or hard conversations, downplaying their own needs, silently hoping problems will go away, using humor or distraction to diffuse seriousness, withdrawing or becoming quiet during disagreements, saying it's fine when it's clearly not, suppressing emotions to keep the peace, refusing to engage when emotions get tense, and letting resentment build quietly. Those are common behaviors for conflict avoidant. Now you know exactly what type you are, but also maybe you recognize some of these behaviors in somebody around you. Maybe you now know that your partner is conflict avoidant, or your mom, or your best friend. So you're going to start understanding what people are like when there's a conflict situation. Here's some health risks if you are conflict avoidant. A conflict avoidant individual tends to suppress or deny their feelings to prevent confrontation. They might avoid addressing issues altogether, which can lead to unresolved tensions and stress. Some of the health risks of being conflict avoidant, because there's a toll. Remember, we've talked about this before on previous podcasts, that your body remembers and your body stores memories and trauma and all kinds of tension. And that's exactly what's going on right now. If you are conflict avoidant, there's a physical toll on your body. You may have, if you're conflict avoidant, chronic stress. Constantly avoiding conflict can lead to increased stress and anxiety because issues remain unresolved and continue to simmer under the surface. You may also experience emotional suppression. Avoiding conflict may mean bottling up negative emotions like anger, frustration, and sadness, which can lead to emotional numbness or depression. You may also have physical health issues. Long-term emotional suppression can affect the body, leading to headaches, digestive problems, high blood pressure, or even heart disease due to your body's prolonged stress response. Relationship strain. Unaddressed issues can damage relationships, leading to loneliness, resentment, or feelings of isolation. That is conflict avoidant. Now we will move on to passive aggressive. Passive aggressive core behaviors, they indirectly express anger or frustration instead of addressing it openly. Common behaviors include sarcasm or backhanded compliments, procrastinating as a form of resistance, giving the silent treatment, forgetting tasks or responsibilities intentionally, saying whatever or I'm fine with visible irritation, making vague or ambiguous comments with hidden meanings, withdrawing affection or cooperation without explanation, acting compliant but subtly undermining, smiling while clearly irritated, making others feel guilty without saying it directly. And some of the health risks of passive-aggressive behavior. A passive-aggressive person expresses their anger indirectly, often through sarcasm, backhanded compliments, procrastination, or avoidance of direct communication. This style can be confusing and harmful to both parties involved. And the health risks include increased anxiety and tension. The lack of direct communication can create an atmosphere of confusion and anxiety, as the other party may not know how to respond or feel manipulated. Chronic anger. Unresolved anger tends to build up over time and can be expressed in subtle, indirect ways, leading to internalized resentment and anxiety. Relationship breakdown. Passive-aggressive behavior can erode trust and lead to misunderstandings, making it hard to maintain healthy, effective relationships. And lastly, a passive-aggressive person will experience mental health strain. This style can contribute to a cycle of repressed emotions and passive hostility, which could lead to depression, feelings of inadequacy, or a loss of self-esteem. That's passive-aggressive. That's 2, conflict avoidant and passive-aggressive. Now we are going to move on to the explosive type. An explosive conflict type experiences these core behaviors. They bottle up feelings until they erupt in an outburst. Some common behaviors here: they suppress emotions repeatedly in day-to-day situations, frequently saying it's not a big deal when it clearly is, building a list of grievances without sharing them, blowing up over something small like the last straw, emotional outbursts that seem out of nowhere, apologizing after but not addressing the underlying pattern, feeling out of control or overwhelmed by emotion during conflict, experiencing physical signs of stress before exploding, using past events as fuel during the explosion, regret or shame after the outburst. Let's look at some of the health costs of being explosive. This style involves holding in anger or frustration over a long period until it eventually erupts in an explosive, uncontrolled manner. While this may offer temporary relief, it comes at a high emotional and relational cost. Some of those health risks include emotional instability. Chronic repressed emotions can create emotional instability. When the explosion happens, the individual often feels overwhelmed, guilty, or out of control. Physical health issues. Sudden bursts of anger or frustration can trigger physical responses such as elevated heart rate, high blood pressure, or even a heart attack in extreme cases. Relationship damage. The explosive outburst can deeply damage relationships, making it harder to resolve issues calmly and leading to a pattern of unhealthy communication. And of course, there's a mental health strain for explosive conflict types. This style may lead to depression, anxiety, and feelings of regret. The cycle of simmering and exploding creates a stressful environment for both the individual and those around them. And the last conflict type, confrontational aggressive. This one is hard to miss. A confrontational aggressive person handles conflict directly, but with intensity, force, or domination. So some common behaviors are raising their voice or yelling during disagreement, interrupting or talking over others, using blame, accusation, or criticism, pushing for a resolution immediately on their terms, using threats, ultimatums, or intimidation, dominating conversations, not allowing space for others, personal attacks or name-calling, dismissing or invalidating the other person's feelings. Winning the argument is more important than understanding, showing little empathy in the moment of conflict. And let's look at the health costs of being confrontational aggressive. Aggressive confrontational behavior often involves direct, hostile, or threatening communication. While the individual might feel they are asserting themselves, this behavior is often destructive and can escalate conflicts. The health risks of being confrontational aggressive: chronic stress and anxiety. Constantly engaging in aggressive confrontations or anticipating conflict can create a high level of stress, leading to burnout and anxiety. Physical health issues. Long-term stress from frequent aggressive confrontations can lead to various health problems like headaches, digestive issues, and cardiovascular problems. Relationship isolation. Aggressive confrontational behavior can isolate the person as it alienates others and may damage or end relationships entirely. Mental health issues. Aggression can lead to feelings of anger and frustration, but it can also be a symptom of deeper mental health concerns such as unresolved trauma, anxiety, or depression. Over time, it can exacerbate these conditions. And some common health risks across all of the conflict types. There is increased cortisol levels. So regardless of the specific style, poor conflict management often leads to increased cortisol, the stress hormone, which can negatively affect your immune system, increase inflammation, and contribute to various chronic conditions. Sleep problems. Unresolved conflict can lead to poor sleep due to stress, anxiety, and rumination over the issue. Impact on mental health. Chronic, unmanaged conflict is linked to various mental health problems, including depression, anxiety, and even conditions like PTSD, depending on the severity and nature of the conflict. In short, while the style of conflict management varies, all of these approaches can negatively affect both mental and physical health. It's generally healthier to learn and practice effective open communication strategies, such as assertiveness and compromise, to resolve conflict in a way that supports emotional well-being and healthy relationships. And of course, like for myself, as I mentioned before, conflict became my world as a principal, and it wasn't something that I was prepared for, but it came part and parcel with the role of being a principal, that you now are constantly placed in situations where you need to be bringing peace to the school setting so that kids can be learning. And that meant you were constantly navigating conflict. And like I said, I was a little bit aware of some of this information prior to stepping into the role, but it became very, very large once I was in that role, that I started to really recognize these personality types, these conflict types, and then having to go, what do I do with this? What do I do with all of this information? How do I help to mediate or ameliorate these situations to bring in a sense of peace and harmony? And it really kind of baffled me. But then I started to really recognize the patterns. Like I said, all the information that I just shared with you, I really started to notice when people were passive aggressive. I really started to notice when they were explosive or conflict avoidant, and how that often impacted the relationships. And they were staff members who struggled to connect, and it was parents who were struggling to connect with teachers. It was students who struggled to connect with teachers or staff members. And so I was constantly in the sea of conflict. And it was true in both of my principalships, in both places, that I started to recognize that people, if they were locked into their conflict type and they were unaware of maybe their patterns, their defense mechanisms, then it often became a struggle to push them out of that zone and into, some kind of harmony, some kind of team building, collaboration with the other parties. But then I also started to notice that with the right coaching for people, that they were able to move out of these conflict types, including my own. And so I promised you that I would share with you what my conflict type was. And okay, now you can take a guess. And, every time people guess, they always, I'm going to say almost always get it wrong. They usually think I'm explosive or confrontational aggressive, probably because, I'm not a shy person, and I definitely, end up doing a lot of speaking engagements and, talking to large groups, and that doesn't bother me at all. But actually, my natural default conflict type is conflict avoidant. I really struggled with conflict for a long time, and it wasn't until really I came into this job as a principal that I had to really start to understand my own, aversion to conflict and understanding that it didn't make things go away. I had to really sit with myself and say, okay, what are the steps I can take to move out of this conflict type? That's where I want, us to do some work. I'm going to do some coaching with all of you. If you're now sitting there and your head is spinning and you're like, wow, I know, 3 passive aggressive people. I know 2 conflict avoidant people. I'm confrontational aggressive. Like, this is making a lot of sense to me. What do I do with all of this information? Well, now I want you to understand that there is a 5th conflict type. And the 5th one is an assertive type. And I want all of us to work towards getting there, because once we can achieve an assertive conflict type, the amount of drama that we experience in our life and tension and all of these health risks that you saw really starts to decrease, and we start to walk in our power in a way that's not domineering, like a confrontational, aggressive person. They could be assertive, except for the fact that their ego gets involved and their temper gets involved and they become larger than life. And so then that's kind of the struggle for a confrontational aggressive person, is that they need to learn how to tone down their energy and what they're bringing to a situation, because they can really amp up the drama. So the 5th type, and so this may be, if some of you answered those questions and you said, I would never do any of these, maybe in that situation, you were kind of leaning towards an assertive response. Like, for instance, when the boss asked you to come and speak with them after school, and, we saw all the excuses and all the other things that we could do as, instead of sitting with the boss. But many of you would probably just go and sit with the boss and see what's going on, right? And then that would be maybe an assertive response. So some of us, maybe, for instance, myself, conflict avoidant. Maybe I'm not conflict avoidant in every situation, but that's my default. So that's what I wanted us to be clear about, that that's your default, that's your go-to coping mechanism, defense mechanism. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do it 100% across the board. If, say, you have 1 or 2 assertive people in your life, then maybe if you have a situation with them, you're more likely to respond assertively to that person, and we're more likely to be dramatic with other personality types. And it really is our response to conflict, but also our response to the people around us. The different conflict types that we see, we're not going to respond always the same in in every situation. Maybe you're one of the people that ended up, when you were doing your scoring, maybe somehow you landed between two conflict types. And that also is possible. Sometimes we're going to behave a little bit differently in one situation than we are in another. It's not, a very super generic conflict type that you're going to fit in. That sometimes, there's some movement between those types. But generally speaking, we usually kind of have one main conflict type. Knowledge is power. It's not to label yourself. I don't want you to feel bad about, this was just simply your natural response to conflict. How do we move towards something more assertive, more, bringing more peace and more harmony into our lives? It's possible. It's 100% possible, because I have moved myself from conflict avoidant into assertive. And that's not all the time, I still naturally can regress to conflict avoidance sometimes, but I'm more likely to sit with myself and go, hey, Jess, are you being conflict avoidant? Or, do we need to have a difficult conversation in this situation? And so, as we progress through this conflict series, we will definitely tackle all of those things. But for now, what I really wanted you to take note of was all of these conflict types, and start looking around you and start noticing, because what we're going to do in this conflict series, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to learn how to move out of our conflict type. So whatever you are, if you're conflict avoidant, if you're passive aggressive, how do we move towards being assertive? We're going to do that together. And also, how do we respond? If somebody is confrontational, aggressive, and they come to us in their, in a conflict situation, and they come to us with all of that drama, how do I respond in an assertive way so that, I can minimize the drama, I can reduce the tension and the conflict? There's definitely ways on how to accomplish that. And, so it goes both ways with conflict, right? There's initiating the conflict, because sometimes you're going to be the one who needs to address something, and maybe somebody is, not behaving in a way that meets your expectations, or is being conducive to, a harmonious home life. Then we're going to be able to address it, but we're also going to be able to respond to it. So there's going to be two sides to that. So you're going to learn about that. And then, like I said, of course, the difficult conversation, that one is a tricky one. And that one was something that, like I said before, I really struggled with that one, especially as a leader, because it was really, it's just such a crucial part of leadership that you need to be able to address issues. But for myself, I really wanted to learn, how do I address things in peaceful, harmonious way, with love and grace and compassion? How do I build a relationship even when there's conflict, instead of severing it? And in my experience, most of the time, I really saw a lot of destruction as a result of conflict, which is why we have all these default conflict types, because nobody likes conflict. Like I said to my best friend, and she laughed pretty hard at this, but I think conflict is the other C word that people don't like. The first one is cancer. People don't like that word. And conflict is the other C word. Nobody likes conflict. And I get that. And it's definitely something we have to learn about. But, that's why for this podcast, that was really important to me, that, we were able to work through our conflicts together in a good way and learn about them. But also to recognize that conflict isn't the only part of a relationship. It definitely is a part, but of course there's still connection. There's still, communication. There's still, building something soft and sweet and kind and beautiful with somebody else. So I don't want to get hung up on the fact that, conflict exists for sure, but I don't want us to think that it's the most important part of a relationship, because it's not. We definitely, love is a big part of it, but I don't want conflict to be the thing that really destroys your relationship. And to be honest, I'll share a little bit here. I really believe that my first marriage ended as a result of our conflict types, right? Like, I think I was conflict avoidant and he was more explosive. And so because with an explosive type, you think about it, they avoid, 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 and then suddenly boom, so we had the habit of both of us avoiding topics and not talking through them and not working through issues. And a lot of that is that discomfort, right? Like conflict produces feelings of discomfort, being uncomfortable, because now we have to talk about things, that are awkward, painful, and my heart goes out to those people, when you're in those situations and you want to address something and it could go sideways. People could revert to a very dramatic, response, and that's what holds us back. A lot of it is fear, right? We don't want to see the damage and the destruction. But like I said, so in my first marriage, that was definitely a huge part. That it wasn't until later on when I was in therapy and when I was doing a lot of this kind of work that I really started to understand and recognize that, if we had learned tools 25 years ago or whenever I was married to him, that if somebody had sat us down, maybe shared this podcast, then I think we would have been able to learn how to be assertive and how to navigate our conflicts, because they exist in all relationships. And if we had learned that tool, maybe we wouldn't have divorced, and that's not to say that, oh, I'm so sad and I want to get back together. Because people always say that to me when I'm talking about this example. But I do think that, it was a prime learning situation for me, right? It was a learning experience that I needed to endure, really, so that I could one day sit here and sit with all of you and share this. And hopefully, we're all going to move towards being assertive and being confident in our relationships and not being afraid of, those awkward moments, those uncomfortable moments, because they need to happen. And, often, like I say when I'm usually teaching, teenagers about this kind of stuff, I always highlight to them about their emotions, all of the emotions that they could experience, that not to judge them, that we have emotions for a reason, because there's a need underneath it. And so the emotion is simply carrying information and helping us to understand what our need is that's not being met in that moment. And that comes from Marshall Rosenberg. So if we're able to unpack our emotions and sit in the discomfort of that, then we're able to identify, what do I need to do in this situation? What do I need to change? And that's not to say, we'll do this conflict series and you're going to learn how you can, better communicate with everybody in your life, your boss, with your partner, with your mother, with everybody. And, it's not going to fix every single relationship. I will, definitely mention that, because sometimes you will have hard conversations with people. And maybe at that point you understand that this relationship has run its course and maybe it's too toxic, because a relationship needs to be two people working at it. Doesn't matter what the relationship is. And sometimes, we're the only willing party. And if we're the only willing party, then this relationship is not going to survive. You could be a martyr all you want. You probably won't get very far. And so you do need somebody who's willing to do the work so that you can repair this relationship, because it's a relationship. And so sometimes, you might be putting in the effort, you might be, doing everything to a T, on this entire conflict series. You might, take notes and practice everything and move into an assertive conflict type. And now you discover, hey, wait a minute. Not everybody is, responding assertively too, and they're still, kind of stuck in their drama. And we can't control people, right? We cannot control people. We can understand people and we can try and work with people. But I want you to understand that sometimes, you may say, okay, I have done everything I can in this situation. I have turned over every stone. I have, learned and grown, and maybe ultimately you'll decide I've outgrown this person, right? Like they're not doing the work. They want to stay stuck. They are comfortable in their conflict type and they do not want to do anything healthy. Then you say, okay, then I have to accept that. And that's information for me also, that now I recognize that, I might be alone in this situation or alone in this relationship. And if I'm alone in this relationship, then maybe I'm not having a relationship. And maybe what I need to do is to accept that and move and take my energy elsewhere where, maybe somebody will appreciate it and will do the work with me. And, that might be a hard thing to accept if it's a family member. And I always say with family, that if you come to do all this work and you recognize that your family is unhealthy, then yeah, maybe you do need to cut them off. But I always leave room for hope that somebody's going to change, and so we love and pray for them and hope that these people are going to see the error in their ways and learn to work on themselves, do some healing, and at some point maybe we can return to this relationship, right? And so, it's not a total loss. Sometimes you have to walk away and you have to teach people that, they need to respect you, that you're coming to them with love and grace and compassion, and you want to work through this. You're not coming to them with drama. And if you're willing to do that work, but they're unwilling, then you say, okay, then I'm going to accept that and I'm going to move on with my life without you, respectfully. And at some point, if you feel that you're willing to do that work and you're ready to meet me halfway, then maybe we can talk at a later date about this relationship being resurrected, and so like that's happened to me in dating relationships where I've said to somebody, at this point in time, I don't think we are a match. I feel like, and giving that feedback, because it's really important to me that we give people feedback, that they understand the things that have maybe crossed our boundaries, the things that we didn't appreciate, and give them real tangible things that they can work on. And if we have done that and we have provided that information, then we can say, you know what, later on, if things are better and, you've spent some time working on yourself, then maybe we can revisit this and maybe it'll be a better time for us. But I'm pretty forgiving. So I think not everybody would take that stance. They think you burned me once, that's it. And I get that. I mean, it sucks to be in a relationship where you're constantly giving and somebody is being disrespectful. I really understand that. But I have seen people grow and I have seen people change. And I know personally I've grown and I've changed. And so it's really important that we always hold out that hope for people. So, don't write them off entirely. Sometimes we just take stock and we say, okay, you know what, at this point in time, we are not going to work together in this relationship. But down the road, if there's some changes, some good, healthy changes, and some good, honest communication, difficult conversations, to make sure that we're on the same page, if we can accomplish those tasks together, then maybe this relationship can have another chance. And it can grow and it can flourish as long as we're both committing to doing the work and we're both on the same page. So that was the first episode of the conflict series, which I have been dying to do. I can't even tell you. It's been like a whole entire year. I have been wanting to do this conflict series on this podcast. So we're starting today. Now you know your conflict type. Now you're identifying other people's conflict type. Go back, pause, rewind, and just kind of study them, and you're going to start figuring out people. But like I said, don't label them. Don't label yourself. That's not the whole point of this exercise. The point of this activity is so that we can take stock of where we are. Where are we and where do we want to go, right? And identifying the people around us. Where are they? How do I respond to them? How do I use this information in a way that can help promote peace and harmony in my in my relationships. So that's the whole point of this. So don't just go around judging people and pointing the finger. You'll only create drama. And this conflict series is to try and minimize the drama. Okay, so thank you for sitting with me, and I hope you learned a lot. And yeah, we're gonna learn some more coming soon. So take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.